Ragusis. I'm studying at CASS Business School. I'm a student, and I will be translating Mr. Kazakis' speech. Before everything, I would like to introduce the subject by introducing the speakers themselves. Initially, we have Mr. Dimitris Kazakis, who is an economist and financial analyst from Greece. Can everyone? So he has worked for numerous companies in Greece and abroad. He is actually writing articles for a well-known newspaper in Greece. He's the General Secretary of the United People's Front, E.P.A.M, and he will be analyzing and discussing the issue of the Greek crisis, the debt, and his own opinion about the solution that he is suggesting as the General Secretary of the United People's Front. Afterwards, initially, actually, we have Tim Congdon. He's an economist and businessman. Has been working for over 30 years within the sector. He has been a strong advocate of the sound money and free markets in the UK, and he's often regarded as the UK's leading monetarist economist, and is one of the most influential economic commentators as well. He was a member of a treaty panel of independent forecasters, the so-called wise men, and between 1992 and 1997, which advised the Chancellor of the Executor on economic policies. Tim Congdon has been a visiting professor at the Cardiff Business School and City University Business School, which is actually now called CASS Business School. So, with no further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Congdon.
It's a great pleasure this evening to be speaking at CASS Business School. I was a visiting professor here some years ago. On this occasion, well, I used in those days to speak only about economics. On this occasion, it's a mixture of economics and politics. I am, this particular evening, I'm the economic spokesman of the UK Independence Party, and it's my pleasure to introduce Dimitris Kazakis of E.P.A.M. to talk about the current crisis in the European Union, and obviously particularly as it affects Greece and Cyprus. I don't need to tell you that we live in difficult times. I think one could say reasonably that Britain started off in this crisis as in some ways the sick man of Europe. We had our difficulties with the Northern Rock in 2007, and I remember at the time that in the rest of Europe we were seen as having a particular problem because of Anglo-American capitalism, and the rest of Europe was doing very well. And this may have been one reason why Cyprus joined the Eurozone in 2008, really quite recently, only 5 years ago. At any rate, when we look back over the last few years, I think we can say that somehow Britain, as it tends to do, has muddled through. We're not doing so badly now. And I'm afraid the problems are now very much in our neighbours. And the growing view is that Britain was absolutely right not to join the single currency project in the 1990s. We're absolutely right to stay outside. This, in a way, was the most important achievement so far of the Eurosceptic movement in this country. And so, one of the questions that you may be interested in, Mr. Kazakis, is why this happened. So in terms of introducing you this evening, I think that might be one of those things that you'd like to know. Now, I was involved in the debates in the 1990s, and I would say the big difference between Britain and other European countries, almost without exception, is that we had a very lively, a very interesting, and sometimes a very bitter debate in this country about whether we should join the single currency. And the critical question was, does monetary union mean political union? And in Britain, We joined the common market, as then was in 1973 for economic reasons. People in Britain overwhelmingly have never wanted to join a European political union, and so the simplest answer is why we didn't join the single currency. We saw that it meant political union, and we didn't want to get involved with that. Of course, there are all sorts of shades of opinion, but that was the heart of the answer. Now the question then is, well, why is it the case that monetary union implies political union? Why are these two things connected? And there are many reasons. This evening I'm going to concentrate on just one particular aspect which is very relevant to Cyprus. I hope not to Greece, certainly to Cyprus. And we know, obviously, that in those negotiations in the 1990s, there was a lot of emphasis on the need for keep budget deficits down. That's necessary to join the single currency. Who then says whether your deficit is too high or too low? The Commission does. They're not part of your country, they're foreigners. Therefore, you're being told what to do by foreigners. Therefore, you're no longer in control of your own country, and so on. And I think that was probably the key argument. But there was another argument, and if I may say so, it was an argument that I made in the public debate. I hope we... of course, the meaning of this the last few weeks has become terribly. One of the most important things, we take it for granted in ordinary business life, that bank deposits will repay in full. Okay? 100 cents a year, 100 pence in the pound, and so on. And this is a key part of the modern state. It is supposed to be the most important reason, probably, that banks are regulated much more than other industries. This is supposed to be something that happens in every nation of the modern world, but okay. Now, if you actually checked the documents of the Maastricht Treaty back in the early 1990s, and I did this, by the way, as did other people in Britain, you could see at that time that the architects of the single European currency had not thought about these aspects of the subject at all. They had not thought about what happens when a banking system faces a rump. What is the job of the European Central Bank? And they had not thought at all about deposit insurance. I remember myself, I'm going to be a little bit vain, I'm going to boast a little bit. I remember talking to a very senior official, I won't say who it was, an Italian official, involved in this process at a dinner in London in 1992, and I said, what happens if there's a run in one country of Europe, and you have this European Central Bank in another country in Europe? Is that central bank supposed to lend to this commercial bank in that country? And these things are always very political and very difficult, because if you don't lend, you damage the other country. It's bad enough inside, think about Northern Rock, it's bad enough inside one country. Think about the tensions, the resentments, if this is cross-border and there are different countries involved. I asked this question. I was told, runs on banks don't happen in the modern world.
Yeah.
I was also told, I then said, but look, maybe that retail runs don't happen, if people, the general public doesn't, but wholesale runs from other banks certainly happen in the 1980s. No proper answer. And these things were not thought about at all at the start of the single currency. Now, this doesn't matter perhaps too much if you have a healthy banking system in which the deposits, which are put in purple, are fully covered by the bank's assets. The deposits, can get repaid in full from the bank's assets. Fine. And in fact, the value of the assets has to fall by 25% before you're starting to affect the depositors. You wipe out the bondholders, debates about that, you wipe out the shareholders, and then eventually you get to the depositors. But then, suppose that there is, I'm afraid, those loans have gone bad, those government securities aren't paid back in full, perhaps they were Greek government securities, and actually the depositors aren't covered in full by the assets. In this particular example with lost so much that there's this asset deficiency of around about, well, a bit over 20% of the bank balance sheet, and depositors therefore face a big problem, exactly as is the case today in Cyprus. Now look, excuse my being referring to Dickens and Mr. Mickle, but something might turn up, and it's amazing how in these crises, if you give them long enough, they kind of sort themselves out. What you need is a friendly central bank, all right? Maybe not a central bank in Frankfurt, but, you know, a friendly central bank gives you a loan, and over 5 or 10 years, the bank makes profits, operating profits. There's a recovery, the asset prices recover, and the loans become, the customers to pay them back, and that asset deficiency is removed by the process of time, and eventually life returns to normal, and so on. But look, you need that friendly central bank. And these things are, I'm afraid, very political. They're difficult enough in one country when you've got several countries with the same currency, the same banking system. You're going to get all of those international tensions that we're seeing at the moment. But let's suppose that this loan from the central bank to give you that 5 or 10 years isn't around, and you've got to try and sort this thing out very quickly, got to sort it out, say, in a few months. Then there are various things that can be done to meet that asset deficiency. You can bring in other banks, and they say, look, you know, this banking system, basically, long run, there's going to be some profits from this banking system, so let's inject some new capital, and it comes from new shareholders. They may be from another country. Obviously, we've had the case in Cyprus of possibly Russian investment in the Cypriot banking system. They just mentioned in that part of the world, the Turkish banking system, Turkey's had lots of financial crises in the last 50 years, and many of its banks are owned by foreign banking groups. So that new equity can come in, wipe out the asset deficiency, and then the deposits can be paid in full. Okay, it's one possibility. And then there's another. If at the start of this process, the people involved in putting together the single currency had thought about deposit insurance and put together property deposit insurance funds across the whole of the Eurozone, it might be possible to tap the deposit insurance fund to make good the asset deficiency in the banking system. But actually, they need to think about this at the start, and as I explained, they hadn't done so. There's the possibility that the central bank itself might have lots of capital. And this is going back some time, but 50 years ago, certainly 100 years ago, in Britain, the Bank of England had huge amounts of capital, which is one of the reasons why it was a very successful central bank. When things went wrong in the banking system, quietly, the Bank of England would inject some capital, probably lose it over 5 or 10 years, and then it gradually be sort of, over time, removed from the accounts and forgotten about. But you need a central bank with lots of capital. Haven't got that, then you can't use this. So what you're left with as the very last link in the chain of security is, well, it's pretty obvious what it's going to be. What happens? You come back to the government. You have a banking system that is completely bust. There isn't enough assets there to repay depositors. The only answer is the government. And that is why, you think this is one of the key arguments that was made, I certainly made this 20 years ago. If you want monetary union, you must have political union so that the entire banking system of Europe with a single currency is backed up by a European government. Then there aren't any of these international tensions and squabbles and resentments. And then you have European political union, and that, of course, is what Monnet wanted when he recommended 50 years ago now that Europe adopt a single currency as part of the process of political integration. The solving for the banking system and the government are inextricably linked, therefore, when you get to these kind of banking crises, it is bound to be the case that the government gets involved, and then you're straight into politics and all the rest of it. I just say here that Milton Friedman had, in my view, a brilliant remark about the euro when it was being discussed and debated in the 1990s. He said, the euro, which he was very much opposed to, will work fine until the first crisis. And my word, has he been right. So, nations that participate in European Economic and Monetary Union must expect, over time, they will cease to be sovereign, independent nations. And I think that this point came up very strongly in the British debate in the 1990s. And we didn't want in Britain to belong to a European, we never have wanted to be, as a nation, we never wanted to become involved with a full European, we don't want Britain to become another state in the United States of Europe. We don't want our country to be cut into regions of a United States of Europe run from a foreign capital. So let me just reiterate the point I made at this was something that was not thought through at the start. They had not thought this history properly. And having said all that, you know, it was in a way amazing how country after country in Europe wanted to join this project. And the case of Cyprus is one of those very sad cases which 10 years ago, it may be difficult to think about now, Cyprus didn't belong to the European Union at all. Cyprus joined on the 1st of January 2004 as part of the growth of the accession of the East European countries. Malta and Cyprus joined. And as I say, it only joined the single currency in 2008. Look, I'm not going to hide my beliefs and prejudices and so on. I am the spokesman of the UK Independence Party. In my view, what's happened in Cyprus is disgraceful. Different groups of depositors have been in different ways, with no respect for natural justice. There were no exchange controls until a few weeks ago. If you got your money out and held it in a bank deposit in Frankfurt or in London, you're fine. If you kept it in a local bank, you may have lost half of it. You may have lost huge amounts of money simply through, if you like, not following the news close enough. The whole thing was pretty unpredictable. In fact, again, only a few weeks ago, official denials are being made that deposit repudiation could possibly occur. Different banks have had different losses. It depended very much upon, where you kept your money. No respect for natural justice at all. Can I also say finally that in my view, the whole thing has been shockingly incompetent. And I know that in Greece and Cyprus, there's always these comparisons with Turkey. Turkey has had many, many banking crises over the last 50 years. As far as I'm aware, there's never been outright bank repudiation of deposits, despite lots of inflation or the rest of it. I may be wrong about that, but there we are. And that's been the result of being inside, frankly, the single European currency. 10 years ago, Cyprus was a stable, successful, independent nation. It did not have to put up with this and go through this at all, in my opinion. So, when it joined the single currency back 5 years ago, it complied fully with all the Maastricht criteria, public debt was under control, inflation was fine, and so on. Not a hint of disaster. Well, Mr. Kazakis, it's a pleasure to introduce you. I've obviously given a particular slant to the story, and I hope that there's been some interesting comments, and so I look forward very much to hearing your own views on of course, decisions about membership of the Eurozone and of the European Union are very much for the people of Greece and Cyprus, and I don't want to prejudge that. If I were asked if my advice, you can imagine what it would be. At any rate, it's been a pleasure to introduce you and to give, if you like, a British perspective, or one particular British perspective on the crisis. I very much look forward, after the interval, to hearing what you have to say about this subject. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank everyone for the invitation, and specifically the university. Right from the beginning, we need to clarify that the crisis which Greece is currently facing and has led the country to its 5th official bankruptcy does not originate from the actions of a portable government or from the effects of a fiscal problem, which could be solved through the implementation of measures of readjustment and reductions in government expenditure. Greece is bankrupt due to the national debt as a result of the bankruptcy of its own economy, which for the past decades has been suffering from the implementation of a model based on which an economy should grow through concentrating on being extrovert, and as it follows, that economy should obey the decisions made by the international financial and capital markets. In terms of the previous decades in Greece, it should be stated that as long as the international dogma of free markets and deregulation was applied, the Greek economy was becoming a parasitic economy which concentrated on providing cheap services. As a result, Greece depended even more on the fluctuations of international financial markets and kept losing ground in terms of its international competitiveness. This result was expected as the Greek economy was formed around the basic principle that it should be serving the most illegal and extraordinary appetites for high returns and profitability as demanded from both external and internal investors. A very characteristic statistic related to the previous statements is that the percentage of the private returns in terms of the total added value within the local economy during these years of the recession reached 59% in 2009. This is a record figure within the European Union, as it is almost double in comparison to the weighted average figure, which corresponds to the rest of the EU members. For decades, all the governing parties in Greece and their so-called protectors from abroad, such as the OECD, the IMF, and the EU, did everything that could be done under their own power in order to convert Greece into a primary competitive advantage of the Greek economy, the prospect of maximization of the private sector's profits beyond any logical and reasonable limits, which could be set by the economy itself due to its capabilities in terms of productivity. Due to all of the above, the country's productivity started to sink, and that element of parasitism would be transmitted to all business sectors, while at the same time the quackery of the issue and selling of financial derivatives was advocated as a solution. A characteristic statistic indicating this is the fact that in 1992, for every $100 of foreign private capital which was invested in the local economy, 59% was associated with investments in the real economy, 31% was associated with real estate, and just 10% was associated with financial investments. In 1994, the figures were 33% towards the real economy, 7% towards real estate, and 60% towards financial assets. Just before the outbreak of the crisis, the figures were 10% for the real economy, 1% towards the real estate investments, and 89% towards financial investments. The result was that figure corresponding to 63% of the total private profit generated from the economy during the last 10 years was interest. All of the above led to the creation of an economy similar to an existent El Dorado for anyone who wanted to sell derivatives and speculate both from Greece and from abroad. On the other hand, the government would either act as if none of this existed, or even worse, would itself participate in this game, which had as its ultimate goal to squander public wealth in favor of a specific financial and political oligarchy, which, with the support from speculators from the US and the EU, did all that it could be done under their powers in order to attack the Greek society's ethics and instruct the Greek people that it is normal to borrow, request subsidies, and depend on special political favors in order to survive. The result was that the national debt faced an incredible increase as the state had to undertake debts in order to be transformed into a pawn. Its political leaders were corrupted as they sold themselves to powerful financial centers. In return, they had to promote the plundering of the country's wealth by any means available and leave the country unprotected and exposed to any extreme practice of private speculation. At the same time, as soon as the production deficit of the Greek economy increased, so did private and public borrowing. This situation attracted the interest of officials from the Eurozone, and especially from Germany. Greece did not join the Eurozone by mistake, nor is it true that Greece was not ready to join the Euro. This was exactly the situation which was the prerequisite for Greece to join the Eurozone. Greece had to have deficits and debts, which would allow the existence of the potential for further opportunities for profiting for the European banks and the countries which had exporting economies, and primarily Germany. The latter had transformed Greece into a garbage can to which, through dumping, exported goods, requesting in return the provisions of new loans. Greece ended up to be totally dependent on the provision of new loans, which acquired from the Eurozone's own capital market. On December 31st, 2001, the Greek debt was 146 billion euros. On January 1st, 2002, Greece has joined the euro, and up until the 31st of December 2009, its national debt increased by 152 billion euros. In other words, within 7 years, Greece's national debt had more than doubled. This situation is unprecedented, as in 2009, the state's income was roughly 45 billion euros, and its imports were 15 billion euros, while the income generated from services was almost 27 billion euros. At the same time, interest and coupons, which had to be repaid, were 109 billion euros. Under these conditions, Greece was facing a de facto bankruptcy, irrespectively of whether the country could secure any new loans or not. Financial markets were closed for Greece since January 2009, and due to this situation, the Eurozone had to intervene in fear of any implications to the currency itself, due to Greece's inability to repay its debt. In direct collaboration with both PASOK and New Democracy, EU officials manipulated the political transition in Greece in order to promote the formation of a new government with sufficient parliamentary majority, which would be in a position to guarantee that Greece would undergo severe liquidation in favor of its creditors, just like a business or a company which has declared bankruptcy. The politicians in Greece, along with the oligarchy, which rules the country for decades, in order to escape the wrath of the Greek people, agreed to the general disposal of the country under a colonialist regime, in exchange for a small share of the spoils which the European lenders would reap. So, they agreed to put Greece and the Greek people under colonial guardianship and essentially under occupation, having as their main goal the general disposal of the whole country. Thanks to a sequence of memoranda and loan agreements, Greece is practically ruled by foreign commissioners. It is well known that all the laws passed and the policies implemented in the country are not even drafted by officials and ministries, but instead they are drafted by European commissioners. Ministers sign them without any objection and then address them to the parliament for approval. The Greek state has been completely nullified. The government is a mere storefront of foreign powers and conquerors. The results of the policies based on the memoranda were from the beginning disastrous for the country. From 298 billion euros in debt in 2009, or 127% of GDP, the debt increased to 328 billion euros in 2010, or 143% in terms of GDP. While in 2011, the debt reached an amount of nearly 369 billion euros, 71 billion euros more debt in 2 years, or at 178% of GDP. At the same time, the recession of the Greek economy escalated to unprecedented levels, and unemployment, along with mass poverty, continued to increase, while incomes were reduced by 15% as expressed at constant prices. After the first disastrous invasion of the Troika in Greece, it was decided during the second half of 2011 that without a restructuring of the debt throughout a haircut of around 56%, it would not be feasible to deal with the continuous and rapid increase of the debt. The debt restructuring took place in March 2012, but the benefits promised to the bankers involved were such that instead of reducing the debt was eventually increased by 3 to 5 billion euros. So while the restructuring through the haircut reduced the nominal value of the debt by 106 billion euros, Greece was forced to borrow again another 109 billion in order to be in a position to carry out the so-called PSI. This resulted in an increase in debt instead of a decrease. Additionally, the debt restructuring caused the bankruptcy of the insurance funds and the funds of stakeholders in the so-called wider public sector, which includes institutions such as chambers of commerce, scientific associations, universities, hospitals, organizations, and many more. At the same time, it should be mentioned that common people who had invested their savings in bonds issued by the Greek government were seriously affected as well. In order not to become apparent to the Greek people the fraud of the PSI, the Eurogroup decided to proceed to a Greek bond buyback from the secondary market in November 2012. The buyback had as its main goal to reduce the Greek debt by 30 billion with a cost of 11.7 billion, which would have been paid by the EFSF. The Greek government is required to pay 11.7 billion within the next 2 months, an amount which it does not have. It is easy for one to picture Greece's collapse if all this is combined with a continuous collapse of the financial aspect of the government due to the fact that the Greek population fails to meet its tax obligations, the recession which is more than 7% per year, the official unemployment which exceeds 27%, the investments which have fallen below 14% of GDP, the fact that this is the first time in the post-war history of Greece that the disposable income of the population continues to collapse and is far below the minimum level which is required so that a person can survive, and the fact that the private debt continues on its increasing trend. This collapse is fraudulent and deliberate, and aims to sell out the country at rock-bottom prices. The country is said to be sold out not only in terms of its publicly owned property through privatization and concessions, through privatization and concessions, but in terms of the private property of the Greek society as well, which today is mortgaged not only to banks but also to the state itself due to the outstanding financial obligations of the vast majority of the people, due to their failure to meet their own tax obligations. The tragedy is that the Troika is applying more and more pressure, insisting on the disastrous downhill, and the leaders of this country have surrendered in advance and without a fight. For the Euros and the Eurozone's sake, we are in danger of destroying an entire country and eradicating an entire nation. For us, the dilemma is crystal clear. One either compromises with the status quo and simply vindicates ways in order to manage the current situation in the most effective way, or attempts to overthrow this financial regime. In such cases, there is no middle way. If our country insists on waiting for a deus ex machina to save us through some sort of a miracle, we will experience an absolute disaster. A realistic proposal is the one which does not expose the people and the country in any threats and does not allow anyone to sink in despair and hopelessness. If this nation makes the decision to overthrow this financial regime, the recovery will be very fast and the working classes will sense the difference from the first day. What should be done though? First, we need to stop the depend on loans given to our country from the Eurozone which have as their main clause the destruction and selling off of the country. We must deny the repayment of the debt, and this should be accompanied by a repudiation of the debt, which should be characterized as illegal and abusive under the rules of international law. Second, we need to declare the withdrawal of Greece from both the Euro and the Eurozone and the EU in order to introduce a national currency to our economy and regain the ability and the freedom to restructure our economy based on our own criteria and the interests of the Greek people, disregarding the European banking oligarchy. After that, we will need 6 to 8 months in order to introduce the new national currency. Within this period, some direct measures should be implemented. Number 1, the nationalization of the Bank of Greece and the major private banks which have attracted most liquidity from the euro system. Why is that? In order to let the banking system go bankrupt, while at the same time we're in a position to guarantee for the people's deposits. The default will enable the banks to be able to be rebuilt from scratch without any obligations to external investors, while at the same time the banks could proceed to the deletion of debts associated with households and small businesses. Second, the recovery of losses in income from which employees and the retired population suffered right from the beginning of the implementation of the memorandum. Salaries and pensions should be brought back to the levels on which they were prior to the 5th of May 2010. This would be achieved through the use of electronic scriptural money provided by the banks which are under public control, while these banks would provide small businesses with operating loans. Third, the imposition of capital control. In this way, we will stop the bleeding which tyrannizes the Greek economy and deprives it from huge funds from within. Of nationalized banks, the so-called black money market, for which the Greek banking system is famous internationally, will come to an end. Controlling the movement of capital is easy once one assumes control of the banking system, and in our case, this capital control will be associated with selective taxation of capital, which is moving from the economy abroad or comes to the economy from abroad. Untaxed profits, dividends, interest payments, and investments in securities abroad will come to an end as well. Also, on funds from abroad which are destined to speculate in real estate and financial assets will be imposed dissuasive high taxation, while those funds which are directed towards investments in the real economy must be treated favorably, given that they satisfy the government in terms of the provision of new vacancies for employment, which will be relatively secure. They will be wage inelastic, investing in new technology, and value-adding production. Fourth, explicit abolition of layoffs and abolition of the use of bankruptcy in the private sector. In the case where we are dealing with a small business, a freelancer, or an individual producer, the state will guarantee that they do not bankrupt through the provision of direct support or subsidized loans. In the case of large corporations, and especially multinational companies, workers will be given the opportunity to manage the businesses with the state's support. At the same time, inelastic labor rights will be imposed in order to deal with unemployment, and especially unemployment associated with young people. Fifth, direct intervention in the country's external balance of goods and services. Until the Greek economy is normalized and its production capabilities are set to be taken advantage of, imported goods would be substituted by domestically produced goods, and the state will ensure to significantly reduce those imported goods which are not absolutely necessary for the prosperity of the domestic economy and the needs of its society. The government will also have to impose a selective protectionism based on which products will not be imported before domestically produced products are exhausted. And in the case that that those products imported should be at least, and the case that products are imported, those products should be at least of the same quality and production value with the corresponding domestically produced products. Only under such conditions, a less powerful economy may compete on equal terms. Sixth, our main concern during this period would be to maintain the circulation of paper money within the Greek economy, which according to the current data amounts to 26 billion euros. For this, we will implement capital control, which would prohibit the export of paper money and would impose a very high tax to capital, which is about to be exported and invested in equities and bonds abroad. At the same time, we would also allow the influx of paper money from abroad, which would be checked in terms of where it is placed within the Greek economy, in order to prevent any form of speculation. Deposits in domestic banks will not be restricted in any way, but the introduction of the national currency, no one would be able to withdraw physical money. All transactions within the economy would be made through the use of deposit accounts, to which access will be gained through the use of debit cards, like ATM cards. And this is how the use of physical money would be substituted. This measure is necessary, as the government would need to withdraw all euro banknotes, which are estimated to be around 10 billion euros, so that they could be used as a reserve currency of the nationalized Bank of Greece. Through the use of this reserve, we would be able to cover up the current external deficit of goods and services. We should also keep in mind that banks would have neither the character of the current form. Of course, the key to all of this is the quick restart of the Greek economy, in terms of its productivity and investments in the real economy. This may be achieved through the provision of open credit available to those who want to invest in production-related businesses and have as their main goal the addition of value to the process and the provision of secure employment and an extensive program of public investment in infrastructure free from corruption. All of the above will give a sharp upward momentum in the economy, such that when the currency is finally introduced, its exchange rate will be stabilized with little turbulence. Of course, all of this cannot be done if the Greek people does not manage to bring back democracy to its country, and if they do not get rid of the completely corrupt political system which brought this nation to this misery and delivered him as a prisoner to financial markets. The Greek people should bring back this kind of democracy, which has as its main prerequisite national independence and sovereignty of the people, who should be ruling their own countries and not become slaves to their lenders and their corrupt politicians. Thank you very much.